I called my daughter's cell 40 times that spring, and 40 times it rang through to a voicemail she never fixed. Then, on a Tuesday in September, a text arrived instead of an answer, and I read it standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water going warm in my hand. Dad, I've been a coward. Come to the lake house Saturday, noon, please. 14 months of silence, and I did not stop to ask myself why the silence was ending. I want you to remember that, whoever you are, listening to this in your truck or your kitchen or your bed at 2 in the morning. I had 31 years of experience that should have stopped me at that counter, and it didn't stop me for 1 second. My name is Harlan Voss. I'm 66 years old, and until 4 years ago I was a fiduciary risk examiner for the Ohio Department of Insurance. That's not a job most people can picture, so let me tell you what it actually was. When an insurance company suspects one of its own annuity products is being used to drain an elderly policyholder, somebody has to go look. Not a detective, not a lawyer, not yet. A quiet man in a gray sedan who sits at a kitchen table, reads 6 months of statements, and asks the policyholder simple questions. Who visits you? Who has your PIN number? Whether the nice young man from the insurance company who just needs a signature ever actually left his card, I did that for 3 decades. I flagged 418 cases in my career. I was right more often than the lawyers liked, and there were people in that department who breathed easier the year I retired. My daughter's name is Claire. She's 41, an occupational therapist, married 9 years to a man named Rourke Bishop, who does something with commercial real estate development that I never fully understood, and, I'll admit now, never fully tried to. He set up my email account for me back in 2011, same as any son-in-law would, sat right there at this table and typed my name into a box and said, "There, Harlan, you're official." 14 months of nothing after that. Then noon on Saturday, please, and I put on the blue jacket Marlene always liked and I bought a bottle of the good scotch because you don't show up empty-handed to your own daughter's table, whatever's happened. I want to be honest with you about the thing I'm ashamed of, because it's the only thing in this whole story that still burns. I spent 30 years watching families circle an old man like water going down a drain, and I could smell the setup from the driveway 9 times out of 10. My own daughter sent me 11 words on a phone screen, and I didn't run a single one of them through my head the way I'd run 418 other people's warning signs. Hope doesn't care what you know. It gets underneath what you know, and it doesn't ask permission. I got to the lake house 40 minutes north of Sandusky right at noon, the way I've been right on time to everything since 1978. And I was halfway up the gravel path with the scotch under my arm when a man came around the side of the boathouse and put his hand flat on my chest. Not rough, firm. He was maybe 55, wearing a green polo with a Marina logo on it, and his other hand was shaking against his thigh like he was cold in August. "Mr. Voss," he said, "don't go up there. Get back in your car right now. I've cross-examined liars across kitchen tables for 30 years, and you learn the shape of a lie the way you learn the shape of a bruise. This wasn't that shape." I said, "What is this?" He said, "They've already called it in. Go park at the Marathon station on Route 4 and wait, and don't come back here, and please, Mr. Voss, please just go." And then, because some animal part of me still didn't want to believe it, I asked him why he was telling me this, a stranger. And he looked back at the house once, fast, like a man checking whether a door was still shut, and he said, "Because 11 years ago you were the reason my brother kept his boat. I want to stop right there, in that gravel driveway, because I need you, whoever's listening tonight, wherever you are, to understand exactly what I understood in that moment." I did not know this man's name yet. I did not know what he meant by his brother's boat. I only knew that a stranger had just put himself between me and my own daughter's front door, and that his hands were shaking harder than mine. So a 66-year-old man with a bad hip crouched down behind a stack of kayaks at the edge of the Kellerman property next door, still holding a bottle of scotch like the world's worst offering, and I watched. 9 minutes. That's all it took. 2 Erie County Sheriff's cruisers came down that gravel road, slow, no lights, no siren. Behind them, an ambulance, engine idling, nobody in a hurry. And behind that, a beige sedan. And out of it stepped a woman in a navy blazer holding a manila folder against her chest the way you'd carry something breakable. I knew what she was before she said a word. I'd sat across from 40 of her in my career. Licensed clinical evaluator. That folder had a specific form in it, and I knew the form by its weight. The front door of the lake house opened, and my daughter came down the steps in that navy blazer's twin, gray slacks, hair pulled back, not a hair out of place, not a tear on her face. Claire did not look like a woman in crisis. Claire looked like a woman who had rehearsed this. She handed the folder to the sergeant with both hands, and he read it standing right there in the gravel for almost 2 full minutes while nobody moved. And then he did that small thing they do with their chin, and Claire put one hand to her mouth, briefly, the way you do when a thing you've been carrying finally gets set down. Then she pointed toward the carport, at the empty space where my car should have been parked. The sergeant walked over and looked up the road, both directions, the way a man looks when the thing he was promised isn't where they told him it would be. The paramedics never got out of that ambulance. I keep coming back to that detail more than any other. They sat in the cab with the engine running for 18 minutes, and one of them ate something out of a paper sack because there was nothing yet for them to do. They were waiting on me. And then Rourke came out onto the porch with a coffee mug still in his hand, like a man interrupted mid-morning, like nothing in the world was wrong. He stood beside my daughter. He said something to her I couldn't hear. He put his free hand in his pocket, took it out, put it back in. And even from 60 yards, crouched behind a rack of kayaks with my knees screaming, I could read that man's shoulders the way you read somebody who's about to explain away a dent in a car he swears he never touched. He never once looked up the road. Everybody else in that driveway looked up the road at some point, hunting for the old man who was supposed to be walking toward them. Rourke Bishop looked everywhere except the one direction I was actually standing in, and I understood right then that he knew exactly where I was and could not make himself look. I stayed behind those kayaks for almost half an hour after the cars pulled out. My phone sat in my jacket pocket like a stone against my ribs. And here's the thing. I've never told another living soul until this moment, and I'm telling you now because I think somebody out there needs to hear it. Twice, I took that phone out and got as far as pulling up my daughter's name. Twice. Because some part of a father, some very old and stupid part, sits in the bushes and watches his own child help plan his disappearance, and still thinks, surely there's been some kind of mistake. Let me just call her and get this straightened out. The scotch bottle was still in my hand when I finally stood up, and my slacks were soaked through at the knee from the wet grass, and I could not feel 2 of my toes. I sat in my truck in the Marathon Station parking lot for a long time before I trusted myself to drive. I need to stop the story right here and tell you something, because if you have a parent, or you are one, you need to hear this part plainly. Nobody was going to arrest me that day. There was no crime in the state of Ohio in what almost happened to me. If 2 people sign a sworn statement that an elderly man is a danger to himself, and a licensed evaluator co-signs it, that man is taken for what's called an emergency mental health hold. 72 hours in Ohio, no lawyer required to put you there, no judge required to put you there. Just a bed, a paper bracelet, and somebody asking gently whether you know today's date. And 72 hours is precisely enough time to file an emergency petition for guardianship with the probate court, so that by the time you're released, somebody else is already legally standing between you and your own bank account. No handcuffs, no headline. Just a very calm woman with a folder and a very old man in a gravel driveway. I drove back to the little house I've rented since Marlene passed, over on Coshocton Avenue above what used to be a hardware store, and I sat at my kitchen table with my coat still on until almost 3 in the morning. I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because it surprised me. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something closer to recognition, like watching somebody pick up your own toolbox and use it on you. Let me tell you what I handed over willingly, because I did hand it over, every bit of it. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably have too. In the spring of 2019, I had a stroke, a small one, but it put me down for 6 weeks. Rourke came to the rehab facility with papers and a notary and said, "Harlan, just sign this so I can handle the insurance calls for you. You don't need this stress right now. Durable financial power of attorney." 2 pages. I signed it with my left hand because my right still wasn't steady, and I never revoked it. 5 years. That paper sat in a drawer in his office, and it never once expired, because durable means it survives you losing your mind. That's the whole reason they call it that. In 2021, Claire sat right here at this table and explained to me, gently, using words like probate and step-up basis, that I should transfer the deed on the lake house to her and Rourke now, while I was healthy, to avoid the courts later, avoid the fees. "You'll have it forever, Dad. It's just paper." I signed the house over to my own daughter for $1. And then in 2023, they told me the stairs in that old place were getting to be too much for my hip, and wasn't it nice that this little rental on Coshocton had an elevator? It's just paper. 31 years I sat across from other families and watched them do this exact thing to each other, and I said the same three words they all say. It's just paper. It's just my daughter. I said it too. I need you to hear that. It happened to a man who built an entire career watching it happen to everyone else. That's how strong it is. There's one more piece, and it's the piece that matters most, and I didn't understand it until a courtroom in July. In the winter of 2022, I pulled my own credit report to refinance my truck, and there on it was a personal line of credit, $62,000, for Bishop Development Partners, personal guarantee, my signature, dated the 3rd of January. I had never seen that document in my life. I called Rourke. He said there'd been some clerical mix-up at the bank. His loan officer had grabbed the wrong template. He'd get it corrected. 5 weeks later, still there. I called again and asked him to send me a copy of the signature page. And listen to how small this next part is. He didn't raise his voice. He said, "I'll get it to you, Harlan." He never got it to me. I asked a third time in the spring, and a week after that, Claire called and told me, in a voice like a hospice nurse, that I was putting a great deal of pressure on Rourke, that he was under enormous strain at work, and that maybe some distance would be healthy for everybody right now. 14 months of silence started with a father asking his son-in-law for a photocopy. For over a year, I believed I'd lost my daughter because I'd embarrassed her husband. I'd lost my daughter because I'd nearly caught him. Before I go into the hardest part of this, tell me something in the comments. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there right now? I read every one. It's the best part of my week, and God knows I need it some weeks more than others. I need to put something in here, and it belongs exactly here and nowhere else. Marlene died on a Sunday in February, pancreatic, 11 months from diagnosis to the end, which everyone told me was a mercy. And it is, and it also isn't, and both of those things are true forever at the same time. Claire was 32. She drove in from Columbus and sat with her mother the last 3 nights and didn't sleep either one of them. At the funeral, she stood up and talked about her mother's hands for almost 5 minutes with no notes. Afterward, in the fellowship hall of a church on Spring Street with folding tables and a ham somebody's sister had brought, my daughter came and put her arms around me and said, "It's you and me now, Dad." She was not lying. I need you to understand that clearly, because it would be so much easier for me if she had been. She was 32 years old, and she meant every single word. And 9 years later, she stood beside a folder that asked the state of Ohio to take my name away from me. People don't turn all at once. Nobody tells you that part. They slide, a little at a time, in a direction they'd have sworn on their mother's grave they'd never go, and every step is smaller than the one before it. When Claire was 11, I taught her to bait a hook off the dock at that same lake house, out past Sandusky, and she was afraid of the fish, afraid of the hook, afraid of her own hands, and she cried, and I told her, "You don't have to like it, you just have to do it slow and steady, and let your hands remember what I showed them." She got it. I have thought about that afternoon on the dock more times in the last year than I can count, and here's what I've landed on. I taught my daughter how to work through a thing that scared her. I never once taught her what to do when the thing in front of her was a mistake she'd already made and couldn't undo. She called me in June, 5 weeks before the hearing. My lawyer had told me plainly not to answer. I answered anyway. "Dad," she said, and her voice was wrecked in a way I hadn't heard since her mother's funeral. "Please, please just let it go." I didn't say anything. "I know what it looks like," she said. Rourke thought Renata said you needed. She stopped herself. She started again. "I'll sign the lake house back. Today, tomorrow, whatever you want." And I said, "I want the 3rd of January, 2022. Silence on that line, long enough that I could hear a television playing somewhere behind her. "I don't know what you mean," she said. She knew exactly what I meant. I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen and understood that my daughter had just lied to me one final time on the last day it was ever going to work. The man from the marina called me the next morning at 7. "Mr. Voss, this is Dutch Halloran. I own the boat rental office off Route 6. I owe you an explanation, and I need to say it fast before I lose my nerve. My brother Sal ran into trouble with an annuity company back in 2013, an outfit that had gotten its hooks into his father-in-law's retirement account. And you were the examiner who flagged it before they could finish the job. Sal's father-in-law kept his house and his boat because of a report you wrote and then forgot you ever wrote it. I sat down at my kitchen table and didn't say a word. Dutch kept going. Your son-in-law's wife, he said, is a court-appointed professional fiduciary. She currently holds guardianship over 38 wards across 3 counties. 38. Let me explain what that number means, because most people have never heard it. When an elderly person has no family willing or able to step in, or the family's fighting itself into a stalemate, a probate judge appoints a stranger. That stranger controls the money, the house, the medications, who's allowed to visit. She bills the ward's own estate for her hours, $90, $100 an hour. It's a legal industry, a necessary one, even when honest people run it. Renata. I'd never heard the name before that morning. Rourke's business partner, Dutch told me, and something more than a partner, though nobody at the marina said that part out loud. They just watched him dock his boat there. Every Thursday afternoon, at an hour he had no earthly business being free. She doesn't need a crime, Dutch said. She needs a hold, a doctor's signature, and a next of kin willing to file. And your daughter's husband signed the petition. It was filed the Monday before that text arrived on your phone, 2 days before he ever asked you to come to that lake house. The invitation wasn't the trap, Mr. Voss. The invitation was how they got you standing at that address, at that hour, so the paperwork could say you presented in an agitated state. I put the phone down on my knee and looked out the window at Coshocton Avenue for a long while. Then I picked it back up. Mr. Halloran, I said, why did you stop me? There was a long quiet on the line. In 2009, he said, my uncle had a stroke, and my cousins tried to take his hardware store out from under him while he was still in the ICU. A man from the state came out and sat with him for 2 hours. Asked him to read the electric bill out loud. My uncle read it just fine, cover to cover, and that man wrote to the court that my uncle was of sound mind, and the whole thing got thrown out, and my uncle ran that store for another 6 years. I remembered your name, Dutch said. You never once met me. I was 17, standing in a hallway outside the room. 31 years, 418 reports. I could not have told you one single thing about that hardware store, or that uncle, or that 17-year-old boy in the hallway. I saved somebody's whole life, and forgot about it inside a week, because it was a Tuesday, and I had 3 more houses on my list that afternoon. And 17 years later, that forgotten Tuesday walked out from behind a boathouse and put a hand flat on my chest. If you have ever done something decent for a stranger and never thought about it again, and I promise you that you have, more than once, then sit with this next sentence, because it's the truest thing I know at 66 years old. The person who saves you is almost always somebody you helped once and forgot completely, which means the only insurance any of us actually carries is to keep helping people we're going to forget. My lawyer's name is Odette Kessler. Elder law, 26 years. An office above a dry cleaner's on 3rd Street with a poster of the Ohio Revised Code framed on the wall like some people frame a diploma. I laid the whole thing out for her, and she let me finish before she said a word. Then she asked, how much of this do you actually have on paper? None of it, I told her. Then we start with what's already on paper, she said, and turned her laptop toward me. The petition's public record, Harlan. It's been sitting on the docket since Monday. Want to see who signed it? Rourke Bishop. His signature. And I sat there and looked at that name on the screen and thought, that's not quite his hand. I've watched that man sign restaurant checks for 9 years. His R always kicks up hard at the end. This one didn't kick. Odette, I said, pull the personal guarantee from January 2022. My name's on it. It took her 4 days to get a certified copy. The R didn't kick up on that one either. Here's what I finally understood sitting in that office with both documents side by side. Renata wanted another ward, one more file in a drawer that billed by the hour. But Rourke needed something entirely different, and it had nothing to do with money at all. I had asked him for that signature page 3 separate times. If I ever hired a lawyer and made a formal demand, that personal guarantee was 5 to 10 years for forgery under Ohio law, and it carried my name on it, which meant the only human being on earth who could swear under oath that I never signed it was me, unless a court declared that I couldn't be trusted to know what I had or hadn't signed. Do you see it? They weren't after my savings. They were after my testimony. A ward under guardianship can't file a criminal complaint that anyone has to take seriously. A ward's word is worth exactly nothing in a courtroom. Guardianship was the only legal way in the state of Ohio to permanently and gently silence the one witness who could put my son-in-law in prison. Odette filed our response on a Thursday, and then she told me something that stopped my breath cold. You have the right to demand a jury, Harlan. I've read that statute 100 times in my career, and never once seen a proposed ward actually invoke it. They're frightened, they're old, their own lawyer tells them it'll cost more. So a probate judge decides it in 20 minutes behind closed doors, and it's over before lunch. 12 people, Odette said, from Erie County, who get to look you in the eye. They'll ask you what year it is in open court, on the record, in front of everybody, I said. Demand it. And then they came at me. And I have to tell you about this part because people believe the truth just walks into a courtroom and takes a seat. It does not. It gets muddied first. Their attorney filed a motion arguing that a man who demands a jury trial regarding his own mental capacity is, by that very act, displaying the kind of grandiosity and impaired judgment the petition describes. Read that twice. Insisting you're sane becomes evidence that you're not. It's a real filing. It's sitting on the docket to this day. Then an anonymous letter reached the court claiming I had threatened Dutch Halloran. 2 paragraphs, no signature. Then a complaint landed with the Ohio Disciplinary Council about Odette personally. Then somebody, and I've stopped trying to find out who, called the department I used to work for and suggested a retired insurance examiner suing his own family was using old contacts to settle a private grudge. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being 66 with a petition hanging over your head. You cannot prove you're of sound mind. There is no test for it that clears you permanently. Every single thing you do becomes evidence of something. You get angry, that's agitation. You stay calm, that's flat affect and denial. You hire a lawyer, that's paranoid ideation. You don't hire one, that's incapacity to protect yourself. If you've ever been in an argument where the harder you fought for yourself, the guiltier you looked, a marriage, a job, a family group chat, anywhere on God's earth, then you already know this shape. It's an old shape. Most people just don't meet it at 66 years old with the rest of their life sitting on the table as the prize. Odette came by one evening and found me sitting in the dark with the lights off. She didn't turn them on. She sat across from me and said, "Harlan, you wrote 418 of these reports. What did the good ones have in common?" I said, "The old man always had somebody in the room who wasn't family." She said, "Then let's get you a room full of somebody." The hearing was set for the 15th of July, courtroom 2, Erie County Probate Court, and it was the longest single day I have spent inside any building in my life. 12 jurors, 8 of them under 50. Rourke sat at the petitioner's table in a suit that hung off him like it belonged to a bigger man, and I looked at his neck and thought, he hasn't been eating. Renata sat beside him, spine straight, hands folded. And I sat at the other table and learned the strangest thing about a guardianship hearing, which is that you are neither the plaintiff nor the defendant. You are the subject. They talk about you in the third person while you sit there and listen to it. Their attorney went first, a soft-spoken young man, and he put 6 weeks of my own emails up on a screen for the jury to read. Messages supposedly from me to Claire, getting stranger as the weeks went on, talking about Marlene in the present tense, asking why she hadn't come to dinner, talking about a shotgun that had been locked in my gun safe since 2015. Some of those jurors couldn't look at me, and I sat there and watched 12 strangers read what was supposed to be my private grief laid out under fluorescent lights. Then they called me to the stand, and I was up there 2 hours and 11 minutes. He never once raised his voice, that young lawyer. That was the whole strategy. "Mr. Voss, what year is it?" "Mr. Voss, can you tell the jury today's date?" "Mr. Voss, who is the current governor of Ohio. Mr. Voss, count backward from 100 by sevens." I did it. 93, 86, 79. My hands shook so hard on that wooden rail, the microphone caught it. "Mr. Voss, do you keep a firearm in your home? Mr. Voss, is your wife still living?" And I said, "My wife died on the 9th of February, 2018, at Firelands Regional Medical Center, at 10 minutes past 6 in the evening." He asked, softly, "Do you ever forget that?" I said no. He waited. He let the silence sit there until I filled it myself, because that's the trick, and I'd watched 100 lawyers run it and never once been on the receiving end. I said, "I have not forgotten that for 1 single hour of 1 single day in 7 years. And my voice cracked on the word hour, in front of 12 strangers and a bailiff and my own daughter, and he said, "Thank you, Mr. Voss," very gently, and sat back down. Because he didn't need me confused. He needed me weeping. An old man crying about his dead wife on a witness stand is worth more to a guardianship petition than any doctor's affidavit ever written, and I had known that fact for 31 years, and it still worked on me in under 2 hours. Odette stood up at 10 past 1. She didn't ask me a single question. She never called me back to the stand. Instead, she called a forensic document examiner up from Columbus, and she put the email headers up on the screen. Not the messages themselves, the headers, the part nobody ever thinks to look at. Every one of those 6 weeks of emails had been sent from a single IP address registered to Bishop Development Partners' corporate office. Then she put up a second exhibit, a sign-in log from the Firelands VA outpatient clinic dated the 22nd of March, the exact day one of those emails claimed I'd been typing about the shotgun. Harlan R. Voss, checked in at 1:41 in the afternoon, discharged 3:38. I was lying flat on my back getting a knee injection at the precise hour I was supposedly composing a message about a firearm. One juror in the back row, a young man who'd been asked twice to remove his cap, leaned forward with his elbows on the rail and didn't move again for the rest of the afternoon. Then Odette called Dutch Halloran, who described the boathouse, the ambulance idling, 11 years of watching Renata's business up close, and named 2 other families she'd done this to, families whose cases are sitting on a public docket for anyone who cares to look. Their attorney tried to paint him as a jealous outsider, settling a score. Dutch looked that young man dead in the eye and said, "Sir, I've watched that woman's boat dock at that marina every Thursday afternoon for 3 years running, and nobody in that family has ever once looked at me directly. You can't see the dockhand, but the dockhand sees the whole marina." Then Odette called Renata to the stand, and I've turned this part over in my mind more than any other. She was remarkable up there. Calm, credentialed, precise. She explained her bond, her fiduciary obligations, how she'd recuse herself from serving as guardian personally and hand the case to a colleague at her own firm, a colleague who answered directly to her. Odette asked her, "Miss Corvin, why guardianship? Of all the paths available to you?" And Renata looked at her for a long moment and said, "Because I was 19 years old in a hallway outside a hospital room in Toledo, and my father had early onset Parkinson's, and I quit my second year of nursing school to care for him for 3 years by myself. When he could no longer sign his own name, the court appointed a stranger who had never met him. That man sold my father's house in 9 weeks. He sold my father's wedding ring at an estate sale, and it showed up on the itemized accounting as jewelry, miscellaneous, $35. I asked to be heard, and a man with a briefcase told me, in that hallway, that I had no legal standing, that I was nobody." She folded her hands in her lap. "I have never once let myself be nobody again." Odette let that breathe for 8 full seconds. Then she asked, "Miss Corvin, of your current 38 wards, how many have living adult children?" Renata said she'd have to check the files. "Approximately," Odette pressed. "Most of them," Renata said. "And how many of those adult children petitioned the court to be appointed guardian instead of you?" Renata Corvin, who had not blinked in 40 minutes, looked down at her own folded hands. "Most of them," she said quietly. And Odette Kessler said the only cruel thing she said in that entire trial, very softly. "So you became the man with the briefcase." Their attorney was on his feet before she finished the sentence, and the judge sustained it and struck it from the record and told the jury to disregard it, and every soul in that courtroom knew nobody ever would. Then, Odette said, "One final witness, Your Honor, Rourke Bishop." He walked to that stand like a man wading into cold water. She was almost gentle with him. She asked him about a fishing dock in 2003. Asked if he remembered his father-in-law teaching his wife to bait a hook. He said yes, 4 times, before the word would actually come out of his mouth. Then Odette set 2 documents side by side on the screen. On the left, my signature from a mortgage refinance and my Ohio driver's license and a notarized deed. On the right, a personal guarantee for $62,000 dated the 3rd of January, 2022. "Mr. Bishop," she said, "whose hand wrote this signature?" Nothing. 15 seconds. I counted them. The judge leaned forward and said, "Son, you need to answer the question." And Rourke looked at the floor of that courtroom and said, "Mine." Nobody breathed. You could feel it move through those 12 strangers in about 4 seconds, like a light switching on room by room through a dark house. He hadn't been trying to take my pension or my truck or my last years. He'd been trying to make certain that the one witness who could ever put him in a federal prison would never again be allowed to testify about anything at all. Renata turned her head and looked at her partner, and I have never in my life watched a face do what her face did in that moment. She hadn't known he was going to say it. She'd walked into that courtroom with 5 different plans, and not one of them had that word sitting inside it. And Rourke Bishop sat in that chair in a suit that no longer fit him, and began to cry the way a man cries when he's been carrying something heavy for years, and finally sets it down on the floor in front of everyone. And here's the thing nobody in that courtroom would ever forgive me for admitting. I wanted to walk up there. 66 years old, 3 feet from 12 jurors, everything already on the record, and every decent part of me wanted to cross that room and put a hand on the back of my daughter's husband's neck the way you steady a boy who's just fallen off a bike. I stayed in my chair. That is the single hardest thing I have ever done in my life, and I did it with my 2 hands flat on a table, and not one person in that room ever knew it happened. The jury was out 40 minutes. They found me, Harlan Ross Voss, of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own person and my own estate. The judge dismissed the petition with prejudice. He voided the 2021 transfer of the lake house. $1, undue influence. No question about it. He revoked the power of attorney I'd signed with my left hand in a rehab facility 5 years earlier. Then he took his glasses off and looked at Odette and asked whether he'd heard correctly that Renata Corvin currently held guardianship over 38 wards across 3 counties. Yes, Your Honor. He turned to his clerk and said, "Get me the presiding judge of probate, today." And that phone call is the only thing to come out of this entire year that actually matters, because 38 people never once got a jury. They were old and tired, and their lawyers told them a trial would cost too much, so a judge decided their whole lives in 20 minutes behind a closed door. Corvin Fiduciary Services went under state audit that August. Renata surrendered her license before the audit finished. She was never charged with a crime, because there wasn't one on the books that fit what she'd done, and that was always the entire design of it. Rourke pled guilty to forgery, 5 years probation, restitution, and he surrendered every professional license he held, which for a man like him was the harder sentence by far. He's 44 now. He does maintenance work for the county parks department. He wrote to me in December, 6 pages, and I read them twice, and there were no excuses buried in them, which is exactly how I knew they were honest. I haven't answered yet. I will. I don't know when. Claire and I are speaking again, carefully, like 2 people relearning a language they used to know by heart. I won't pretend I've forgiven all of it, because I haven't. And any man who tells you he forgave something like this inside a year is selling you something. But I keep Rourke's letter in the drawer, where the power of attorney used to live. I asked the court for one thing when it was over. I asked to be appointed a volunteer visitor on the reopened cases. No pay, too old to be hired, and too stubborn to be anybody's client. They said yes. Last Wednesday I sat in a living room outside Norwalk with a legal pad on my knee across from a woman named Idella Frank, 89 years old, who cannot tell you what year it is. I asked her all the questions anyway, the date, the governor, backward from 100 by 7s. She couldn't manage any of it. And then she looked at me with cloudy eyes and said, "Mister, I don't know what day it is, but I know they took my mother's rocking chair, and nobody ever once asked me if that was all right." I wrote that sentence down word for word in my report. Number 431. It's the best one I've ever written, and it took somebody trying to erase me to teach me how to actually listen. Here's what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. They do not come for your money first. Everybody assumes it's the money. They come for your standing, your credibility, your right to be believed about your own life. Because once that's gone, the money follows on its own, and so does the house. And so does who's allowed to sit in your living room and hold your hand. Money is a lock. Standing is the key. And here's the part nobody in my old office ever said out loud in 31 years. In almost every one of these cases, the man being erased handed over that key himself, cheerfully, at a kitchen table, because it was just paper, and it was just his own family. So here's what I'm asking you to do tonight, whoever you are, son or daughter or father or somebody's tired husband listening to this on a long drive home. It costs nothing, and it takes 20 minutes, and you're going to feel a little foolish doing it. And I want you to do it anyway. Go find every document you've ever signed and forgotten about. Pull the power of attorney out of the drawer. If you can't find it, that's your answer. Somebody else already has it. If you signed one during a hospital stay or a hard year and never once thought about it since, call a lawyer this week and revoke it and write a new one. It costs less than a car battery. Then sit down and write out every single person who currently has access to your email, your bank, your phone. Read that list out loud to yourself. Ask when you last actually spoke to each name on it. And here's the question I want you sitting with tonight, long after this video ends. It isn't who's stealing from me, it's this. Who is holding a key to my life that I handed them myself and never once thought to take back? Because you did hand it over. You handed it over at a kitchen table, on a good day, to somebody you loved with your whole heart. That's the only way it ever gets in. Before I let you go tonight, I want to hear from you, and I mean that. Comment 1 if you believe I was right to stay in that chair and let my daughter's husband cry 3 feet away from me without moving. Comment 2 if you think I should have gotten up. A father is still a father, whatever paper says otherwise. And some of you are going to say the law had already done its work, and I could have afforded 10 seconds of being just a person instead of a witness. And I've argued your side of it myself, at 4 in the morning more times than I care to admit. Comment 3. If you think my real mistake happened back in 2019, in that rehab facility, a pen in my left hand, and 2 pages I never bothered to read again, and everything after that was just the paperwork finally catching up to the choice I'd already made. Number 3 is the one that keeps me up nights, if I'm honest with you. And tell me where you're listening from, son, and what time it is where you are right now. There's something good in knowing this is playing in somebody's kitchen in Toledo at midnight, or on a bus somewhere in Pennsylvania at lunchtime, or in a truck cab out on I-80 where it's already dark. And if you've ever sat in a room and been talked about like you weren't in it, tell us here. Don't dress it up for us. Somebody scrolling past your comment tonight has never once heard another human being say that particular thing out loud. If this one stayed with you, stick around and subscribe. It's just me, these stories, and a comment section that keeps me more honest than I probably deserve. Thank you for spending this hour with me tonight. Go find out what you've signed. And go be kind to somebody you're going to forget you were ever kind to. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.